Children are born atheist anarchists. Then they get mauled and molded into people who believe in God and country. Intellectual development beyond this leads to the realization that God doesn't exist, and from there eventually that country doesn't exist. There's no inherent value in God, and there's no inherent value in country. Thus the nihilist concludes that there is no value, because anything else would be just some crap people made up. This is where I was at, and this grinding nihilism made me a little bit depressed. I saw nothing moral about racial separatism. It was just a matter of amoral utility, and so I had no value. Combine this with the fact that you are an electric wave, the brain wave, and your emotions are just chemical reactions, all of which itself was predetermined by the spin of a pea-sized dot of matter at the moment of the Big Bang, and you get a case of nihilism that makes Nietzsche seem parochial. Anarchism can cure the nihilist blues, and by anarchism I simply mean thinking without any preconceived notions, any preconceived archons. The nihilist says that there is nothing virtuous about a state, and pats himself on the back for recognizing this fact, but then says we still need a state. That's the problem right there. Mr. Nihilist, you looked up, saw there was nothing there, so why are you still looking up? They told you that there was state virtue and gave you a prism to look through that would make it look like there was state virtue. You were smart enough to throw away the prism and realize that you were staring at an empty void. The problem is that now you base your worldview on that empty void, ergo nihilism. Of course you're going to think there isn't any value. People said there was virtue in the country. You realized that was false, but then assumed that there was no virtue. Same with God. You realize it's all one big black hole, so stop staring at it. The only God that exists and the only state that exists in people's minds. You are the state. You are God. And this is why it's considered the greatest of crimes to call yourself God, because that would call attention to the fact that you are God. The continuity of the self is an illusion because the brainwave flickers in and out. So what? The brainwave doesn't matter. The chemical structures of hormones that cause emotions don't matter. What matters is the subjective consciousness that these things give rise to. Our very existence is subjective and only can be perceived by ourselves. And since our very existence is subjective, value is only ours to assign. And the nihilist depression that comes from the idea that there is no value is proof itself that we create value. Value doesn't come from on high, but from ourselves. And the self comes from the interaction of cells, which come from the interaction of molecules, from atoms, from atomic particles, from quarks, down to a bunch of other stuff, down to the cosmic foam. Value comes from the cosmic foam which created the things which created us. And this is a little bit liberating. This is what broke my nihilism. Sure, you made of cells, but you're not a cell. Okay? Here's what a cell looks like. Normally different levels of reality are invisible to each other because of the scaling effects, but the egg is an example of when scales overlap, and you can see you're not a cell. In fact, the component parts that give rise to your subjective consciousness are just tools for the subjective consciousness. We've been told to look up for so long that looking down is kind of a mind fart. The nihilist looks at where God and country should be and sees it's not there. An anarchist sees it's not there, but then looks down and sees the world that was there all along. And in case you didn't get what I mean by that, here it is. Most nihilists still think you need a state. Nihilists will say that there is no inherent value to any country borders, but you still need a state to keep things going. The dirty little secret is no, you don't. Because value is created by us, because all a God would be is us, and all a state would be is us. And of course that is how it played out throughout history. Okay, these states are just what our grandparents used. Okay, these borders are just things that will shoot you if you try to cross them, and these laws are enforced by beatings or killings. Okay, states are primitive and brutish things, and the extent to which we have peace now is the extent to which we aren't using these systems as much as our grandparents did. And you may think that's ancillary, but nihilist. You were born an atheist anarchist, and you weren't depressed then. Okay, and young children who are still atheist anarchists aren't depressed. Those children aren't nihilists, because they assign value to whatever they freaking want. It's only when you are told that value comes from on high that you have the potential to become a nihilist. When something is set up for you as a child, then your brain develops and realizes it's a crock. That's what makes a nihilist. A nihilist is an anarchist who simply forgot about the value that exists outside of God and country. The value that they assign, the value that they can only possibly create. In the sense that he no longer defends fixed positions of God or state, an anarchist thinks like a child, except with adult brain power.